Good evening, everybody. James Hancock here. I'm back to talk about episode 7 of season 5 of Better Call Saul, an episode called JMM, which obviously stands for his initials, James Morgan McGill. But in the context of the episode, he kind of improvises justice matters most, or as Lalo says, just make money. So JMM stands for a lot of things. But before I get to my official review, I have a quick birthday greeting to a viewer of mine who goes by the name of Chad Duchel. He's turning 40 tomorrow. And the only reason I know this is because his stepdaughter, Gianni Vargas Navalta, reached out to me and gave me a heads up. Apparently, Chad is a massive Beatles fan, as am I. And apparently, he likes this channel quite a bit. So, Chad, I know you and I have interacted on Twitter in the past, but this is a very happy birthday from Geeking with James Hancock. And I thank you very much for your ongoing support for the channel. And one final shout out to the latest episode of Better Call Saul Insider, which had Ray Seahorn as well as Peter Gould on the show. And they had an incredible conversation about everything that went into making episode 6 of season 5. And I love it when Peter Gould's on the podcast because he always brings in movie references. In this case, he talked about the movie Broadcast News, one of the best movies of the 1980s. And he was talking about how, as much as he admires that movie, he's always strived to take Better Call Saul in a different direction because at the beginning of Broadcast News, you see all three of the central characters as children, and they're fundamentally the same as children as they are as adults later in the movie. But whether you're talking about Kim or Jimmy or whomever, Better Call Saul is a show where the characters are always continuing to evolve, always continuing to change. And tonight's episode, episode 7, was further proof of that. But one last thing about the podcast, Peter Gould was joking about how when he was in his 20s, he became one of these obnoxious, pretentious film fans who could tell you everything that was wrong with every movie that he saw. And they had a very fun conversation about how it takes a little age and a little seasoning and a little wisdom to articulate what works about a movie. So the next time you see a snarky review out there by somebody who appears to know everything about movies except for how to love them, remember that little pearl of wisdom by Peter Gould. Let's dive into the latest episode, which began with a rather unexpectedly moving scene where Kim and Jimmy get married. And it's not your typical wedding where you've got a million groomsmen and bridesmaids and family members, etc. They are getting married in a court of law. But for me, that seemed perfectly appropriate because this is their world. This is where they operate. And this is where those words will actually mean something. And I love how Huel is there as the witness, taking pictures with an old school wind-up camera. And I always love how this show incorporates old school technology to establish the period. But the main point that Jimmy has to Huel is that this marriage is more of a legal arrangement as opposed to a romantic arrangement, because now Kim can no longer testify against Jimmy if he ever gets into trouble. And something tells me that's going to play a key role in whatever happens to their relationship, because I think we can all safely assume at this point that at some point, either this season or the next, Jimmy and Kim are going to have a horrible falling out or a split of some kind. And I imagine she's going to be caught in a very delicate situation where she either feels compelled to testify against him or her career gets destroyed by her association with him. But as sweet and as tender as it is, seeing them together, pretty much every time they're together now, I just hold my breath waiting for something horrible to happen. And I love how even on their wedding night, when they should have other things on their brain, Jimmy chooses to confide in her that he has a new client, Jorge de Guzman, a.k.a. Eduardo Salamanca, a.k.a. Lalo. He's got a trial in 6 weeks. He's being offered no bond. And Lalo's putting Jimmy in a really difficult position where he says no trial. He's offering no deals. He wants to get out on bail. And there's this beautiful scene where he asks Jimmy if he wants to be a friend of the cartel. And Jimmy kind of squirms because this is a real soul-searching make-or-break moment for Jimmy, because if he becomes a friend of the cartel, as he explains to Kim, that means private jets, that means an expense account, that means all the trappings of wealth and luxury that he could ever hope for. But it also would mean that he now is a friend of the cartel, essentially that he belongs to the cartel. But Kim seems genuinely flattered that Jimmy has chosen to share all this information with her rather than conceal it, which has been his way of operating in the past. But one of the more satisfying scenes of the episode is when Kim gets in Kevin's face and basically calls him out for ignoring her advice, because Kim and Rich are basically in trouble initially. They're apologizing. They basically feel as if they've let their client down. But as they walk out, Kim realizes that on 3 separate occasions, they told Kevin precisely what to do. And while they're there to advise him, they're not there to order him around. And he deliberately chose to ignore his lawyer's advice. So it's completely ridiculous for Kevin to act as if they let him down. But Kevin gets in a few jabs of his own and says that Kim could do a hell of a lot better than Jimmy McGill, but it appears as if for now their working relationship will continue because he says, see you on Thursday. And the rest of the episode, the show just got down to business with all these great scenes with Lalo and Mike and Jimmy and Guss. And we see that even in prison, Lalo's still incredibly dangerous. He has somebody sneak him a phone. He calls up Nacho, tells him it's time to burn down Los Pollos Hermanos. Nacho is properly freaked out and tells Mike that he wants out, and he also wants out for his father as well. But for the time being, Nacho has to continue to cooperate because Guss is playing a long game as well. But what I loved about Giancarlo Esposito's performance as Guss this episode was how his most dramatically compelling scene was during a scene that should have been totally innocuous or perhaps even cut from the episode. He's in this boardroom making a presentation about his quarterly profits for Los Pollos Hermanos, and it's one of those meetings that's as bland and as boring as you could hope for, where people would kill themselves just to have an excuse to get out of the room. But Giancarlo Esposito is such a marvelous actor. Somehow he manages to sing his dialogue all the same. But we also got a scene with Lydia, who I always enjoy seeing in action ever since her days back on Breaking Bad. But we soon see Gus's plan go into action where he can't make it appear as if anything bad's going to happen to Lalo on the U.S. side of the border because that will create a war that he cannot win at this time, that he's totally unprepared for. So he gets to work on burning down his own restaurant as well as getting Lalo out of jail. And through Mike, they provide everything to Jimmy that he'll need to mount a strong defense on Lalo's behalf. But my favorite little bit when they burn down Los Pollos Hermanos is how Guss strategically places the chicken almost as a timer, and we can see the grease running out of it. And as he's walking away from it, almost like a scene out of like Goodfellas, we see the restaurant blowing up behind him. But the ace that Mike has up his sleeve in terms of getting Lalo out on bail is the fact that he knows he was the person who manipulated the witness that got Lalo into jail in the first place, the librarian. And we get this really interesting scene in court where Jimmy's incredibly distracted by the Whalen family. The Whalen family is the family of the kid who was killed at the travel wire. And while Jimmy's still managing to do his job, he's still managing to mount a strong defense on Lalo's behalf, we can see him drifting in and out where he's no longer present or he's no longer focused. And we can see that the grief of Whalen's mother is really getting to Jimmy. But watching Jimmy and Lalo sharing scenes together is becoming one of my favorite parts of this season. I love how Jimmy tells Lalo that he needs to look scared and he needs to look humble. And he's like, oh, no problem. And he immediately goes into character. But I feel like if Lalo had more scenes, he could very easily steal the show away from Bob Odenkirk entirely. But Jimmy eventually works his magic. He gets Lalo out on bail. It's $7 million in cash, and Lalo says, no problem. However, Jimmy's going to have to pick it up. And then we get by far the best scene of the episode, where after the trial, Jimmy's peeking around the corner, and he's looking at the Whalen family, and he's taking in all their grief and all their sadness. And we get this beautiful shot where he's reflected by a mirror as he's poking around. And it's just one of those little subtle things where you get to see two sides to Jimmy McGill, making us always wonder, are we seeing the genuine article? But I feel like we really do get to see the genuine article in his subsequent confrontation with Howard, where Howard kind of pounces on him and catches him unawares and asks him if he's thought about his offer anymore. And Jimmy initially is kind of squirming, and eventually Howard says, look, the offer's off the table. I didn't want to upset you. I don't know what's going on, but I made you a job offer, and suddenly I'm being beset by bowling balls and prostitutes. And Jimmy, for the first time this season, goes totally savage. And I feel like it's a combination of things. He's still getting over the death of Chuck. He's still got mixed feelings about Chuck. And obviously he's feeling incredibly mixed feelings about the Whalen family and his new job as a friend of the cartel. And he just goes nuts and takes it all out on Howard. But for us as the audience, it was a great bit seeing that release of emotion, because I feel like Jimmy's always trying so hard to juggle all these flaming batons that he never really gets a chance to let off a little steam. And he just starts going crazy about how he's a god in human clothing and how Howard and his law firm, they're basically bacteria. So in terms of emotional catharsis, it was an incredibly satisfying moment. And we see that next episode, Jimmy's only going to get in deeper as he goes to pick up the bail money for Lalo. And we see all these shots of this blood-soaked car. It looks like we're going to get yet another great montage sequence next episode, in episode 8. And we hear Lalo telling Jimmy that he's the right guy for this. And given Jimmy's track record and his ethical and moral shortcomings, Lalo's probably right. Like, maybe Jimmy does want to be the good guy that Kim's in love with, but the reality is working for Lalo is an excellent fit. So as always, I love and adore this show. The world might be in terrible shape right now, but it is always fun on Monday night to enjoy the latest episode of Better Call Saul. So I hope you enjoyed this review. Hope you enjoyed this reaction. Definitely let me know what you think in the comments below. Please consider subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, but hope everyone has an amazing week. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.